Happy Monday. Welcome to a new week and welcome to our fourth week in our conversation about prayer. As this week we are unpacking the ancient art of Lectio Divina. And as we reach back into the history of the church and reclaim one of the more time-honored ways of praying with a Bible passage, today we look at the first of four, you might say, steps or movements within the prayer, which is the Lectio piece. Again, Lectio Divina means divine reading. And in the first movement, entitled Lectio, we're just going to read a scripture passage. And as you read that scripture passage, you're going to read that scripture passage, I'm going to recommend, 3 times. The first time you read that scripture passage, you're just going to get familiar with the text. That way you can remove the curiosity before we begin to actually, you might say, pay attention to our hearts at a deeper level. The first time you read it from the beginning to the end, and you just get a feel on the words, you might say, the direction of the passage itself. The second and third time that you read that passage, you're going to read it much slower. And as much as you are paying attention to the words on the page, you're paying attention to your heart. And as you're reading that scripture passage a second and third time, you're going to slow your pace down. You're going to pay attention to perhaps a word or phrase that kind of tugs at your heart, or a word or phrase that you might say kind of stands out to you. You're allowing the Lord to use the text that is fully inspired, every word of it. But perhaps there is in that moment a word or phrase that the Lord has, you might say, inspired in that moment for you. And as you read that scripture passage a second and third time, slowly, as you pay attention to the word or phrase that kind of tugs at your heart, or you have some extra curiosity about, or that kind of just stands out to you, that eventually is going to be the passage that we meditate on and apply to our life and then speak to the Lord about. But in that first step, we just get familiar with the passage itself and pay attention to what's there in our heart, which does require that we are attentive to our hearts. It requires that we pay attention to the subtle nuances that are there in our hearts. And I do want to offer a word of encouragement that I think lends itself to the first step of Lectio Divina, which is the time of preparation immediately before prayer. I find that sometimes as we are savoring the time of prayer that we have, a lot of us might rush into prayer too quickly. It's important that as you begin to pray, you give yourself some time to kind of slow down, you might say, to kind of let go of the day. And as your heart slows down, you can then be a little bit more attentive to the subtleties that are there. Looking forward to the rest of the week as we continue to pray together. And I want to plant a scripture passage in our hearts for the entire week. And if you're looking for something to pray with, I'm going to recommend that you look at the Psalm either 42 or Psalm 62 would be great psalms for you to pray with this week. If you're looking for a psalm to pray with, Psalm 42 or Psalm 62. In addition to those two, you might pray with Psalm 63. There's a beautiful rhythm that is in the midst of it all. So Psalm 42, Psalm 62, or Psalm 63 if you're looking for a psalm to pray with this week. Tomorrow we're going to unpack step 2, which is actually applying that scripture passage to our life. But until we see each other tomorrow,